Tyler from Aspire Sports here, and I'm going to be giving you my Week 9 waiver wire ads from quarterbacks all the way to defenses. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first one's going to be Cam Newton. Now, these are going to be players that are under 50% owned. There's going to be a couple that aren't, but right now, Cam Newton, he's 63% rostered in leagues. Yes, it's not under that 50% mark, but I do think a lot of people probably dropped him this week. I know I did in one of my leagues. I needed a quarterback, so I think if he's available, I think he's a pretty good streaming option. Plays the Jets this week. We know what his ceiling is, right? The past couple of weeks hasn't been great. I think this Patriots offense, it doesn't get great, but I think kind of figures itself out a little bit, gets a little bit better. So me personally, against the Jets, yes, I think he's a pretty good streaming option this week if somebody dropped him. The next person I talked about has been Tua, and I'm big on Tua time. This past game wasn't great by any means, but he didn't really need to do much in this game. Their defense played really well, and so did their special teams. So against Arizona, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a back and forth game where they're going to need to score some points. So I think that Tua is a pretty good streaming option. I do like the next person here a little bit more, but I still like Tua for season long. Season long, I think he has some really good value going forward. And the next person would be Drew Lock. And Drew Lock, I don't think he's that bad of a quarterback. This week plays Atlanta, who I've talked about it extensively. Atlanta, the worst passing defense in the NFL. And I think Drew Lock has a chance here to put up top 12, top 15 definitely, right near the top 10. So I think he's a really solid play this week. And then we have Nick Foles. Nick Foles this week plays Tennessee, and I don't think Tennessee's that good. I mean, Joe Burrow just had a really good game against them. Ben, for the first half, played really well against them. So I think Nick Foles is in a good opportunity here. His weapons, I think he has good skill players around him. So I think he's in a good opportunity, a good spot to be a decent streaming quarterback this week, and he's only rostered in 9% of leagues. So let's go ahead into the running backs. And the running backs, this one's also 50% or 56% roster, Justin Jackson. Yes, he doesn't meet that threshold at 50%, but he's, in my opinion, the number one. Yes, last week he didn't have that great of a game, but also he was kind of hurt, went into the game pretty questionable. So I think this week he kind of distanced himself a little bit because he looks like the best back. He had 20 touches for like 143 yards or 142 yards this week. In my opinion, he's the best back against a decent Denver rush defense as well. Gets the Raiders next week, where I think he'll be a pretty solid play if you need some help at the running back position. The next one would be Damien Harris. I'm sure a lot of people also dropped him. Only rostered in 40% or 46% of leagues. He had a pretty decent week this week. He's not going to see much out of the passing game. He's going to be there between the tackles guy, but gets the Jets next week, which is obviously a beatable matchup. So I think he's a pretty decent play if you also need some help at the running back position. So if he's there, I would definitely go and get him. Next one will be JaMycal Hasty. We saw Tevin Coleman get hurt. I don't know what the severity is, but he kind of came in, was like their between the tackles type of runner as well. They were down in this game, so he didn't get to see that much work. But next week it's Green Bay. They're beatable on the ground. We just saw what Dalvin Cook did against them. I'm not saying he's going to put up Dalvin Cook numbers, but he's going to be somebody who could definitely, return his value if you go out and get him. 42% rostered, so it might be there in some of your league. We have Gus Edwards as the next one. And we saw what Baltimore did against Pittsburgh, the best run defense in the NFL. They gashed them. But hey, the Steelers still won, though. So really, J.K. Dobbins looked like the best. And if J.K. Dobbins is available in your leagues, yes, go out and get him. He's the top priority in my opinion. Gus Edwards, he will still be involved. He'll probably kind of be the lead back in this offense. And they play Indianapolis next week. It is a tough matchup, but for somebody in a run-first offense that's going to be seeing probably the most carries by just a couple maybe, but probably the most carries and some of the goal line work, yes, he's a priority ad this week. And the next person would be J.D. McKissic, and I've talked about him before. He outsnapped Antonio Gibson against Dallas when Antonio Gibson had his best week. Yes, he didn't have all the crazy stats that Antonio Gibson had, but it is still concerning if you're an Antonio Gibson owner when J.D. McKissic still outsnapped him. So, me personally, I think he's a solid add because they obviously trust him, and it's kind of like a split backfield, only rostered in 25% of leagues. What if something happens to Gibson? He's probably going to come in and be like the guy in this backfield. I wouldn't say the guy. I think a couple other players will probably be a little bit involved, but they do like him. He's their passing down guy as well. So, yes, if he's available, I would add him. He's a decent streaming option this week against the Giants. And let's talk about the next person, DeeJay Dallas. This is only if we have Carlos Hyde and Chris Carson out again. He played decently well. I wouldn't say it was a good fantasy day, but from an efficiency standpoint, it wasn't really that good. He did play against San Francisco, who San Francisco is pretty good against the running backs, but scored 2 touchdowns. If you picked him up, I put on Twitter. If you don't follow us on Twitter, @Aspire Sports _ He had a pretty solid week this week. Very good streaming option. Would be a very good streaming option again if those two guys were to miss. 25% rostered in leagues, so 100% if he's available, I would add him if those two guys are going to be out again. Let's go into wide receivers, and the first one's going to be Corey Davis. I talked about him on my DFS. Corey Davis has a really safe floor. I talked about him in a video yesterday as well. Really safe floor. We see his ceiling, 10 catches, 10 targets, 8 catches, 128 yards, and a touchdown. That's a ceiling. That's a really good ceiling. I mean, he has somebody on the other side, and A.J. Brown, who's going to take pressure off of him, and you kind of have two pretty good guys on the outside that you can't really double team because if you double team one, the other one could go off. So they get the Bears this week, which is pretty tough, and then also go to Indianapolis, which is also tough. But I just think this offense is pretty good. He's a good player, and Tannehill's obviously a good player as well. So if you need some wide receiver help, I think he's a pretty solid add. Next person I talk about all the time, Tim Patrick. He's my boy. He was out this week. They play Atlanta this week. Very beatable matchup. And then they play the Raiders in Miami. So some decent matchups coming up, although I am a believer in the Miami defense. But this week, no. Atlanta's terrible. If he plays, hopefully he plays, he's the number one receiving option in this passing attack right next to Noah Fant. Those two are like 1A, 1B. So I think he's the wide receiver to own. Yes, a lot of people will say, well, Hamilton had a good week, but that's also because he was out. When he comes back in, he'll be the guy to own. So go out and get him if he's still available, which he's available in a lot of leagues. He's only rostered 19% of leagues. Let's go to the next person. That would be Darnell Mooney. And I talked about him in a video yesterday. He's just somebody who pops off the screen. He looks explosive and had his best game this past weekend. Yes, it wasn't the most targets, but I think going forward, he'll just see more work against Tennessee, a team that the defense isn't very good. I'm not a believer in their defense. Now, maybe they might make a trade here and go out and try to get Stephen Gilmore. And, hey, that'd be a pretty good trade for them. We'll see what happens. But Darnell Mooney, if you need some help this week, I think he's a solid option. He has two good teams, two beatable secondaries the next 2 weeks in Tennessee and Minnesota. Although Minnesota didn't look too bad against the Packers, but and the last person here, I believe this is the last, yeah. So the last wide receiver is going to be Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne next week it's Green Bay, and I kind of said that who will probably see the shadow coverage if they do shadow Alexander would probably be Ayuk, who would see the shadow coverage. Yes, you have Nick Mullins coming in. That's going to be a Thursday night game, and possibly no George Kittle depending on the injuries. So you have some options missing now. Deebo Samuel will probably be out as well. So it's basically him and Ayuk now. And I think that Kendrick Bourne showed this past week 10 targets, 8 catches, 81 yards. Pretty solid fantasy day. I think against Green Bay, if he doesn't see the shadow coverage, we'll have a pretty decent matchup and we'll probably be pretty heavily involved again. And let's go to tight ends. And I talked about this in a previous video as well. Eric Ebron, if he's available, you need some help at the tight end position. Say you're a George Kittle owner and he doesn't play this week. 45% rostered in leagues. They play Dallas this week, which obviously Dallas doesn't have a very good defense. And they looked better last night against the Eagles. The Eagles still aren't playing up to their potential and have a lot of offensive linemen missing as well. But Eric Ebron, I believe that he will have, since the bye week, he's been pretty heavily involved. Yes, that 1 week against Cleveland wasn't the best, but that was also because they blew him out. But he'll be involved in this offense going forward. The next person would be Logan Thomas, and I've talked about him a lot also in the video yesterday as well. Since, Kyle Allen took over, he's had better numbers. He's seen at least 4 targets in each game this season, and he's lining up all over the place. He's lining up in the slot, uh, just playing basically all the tight end um, snaps as well. So he's somebody who I think is a solid add at the tight end position, and he might be available in your league. And if you need to stream him, they play the Giants, who obviously he had a pretty decent week against last time they played. So I think going forward, he's a pretty solid streaming option. And the next person would be James O'Shaughnessy. Now, not the best, I know, but tight end, there's really no options out there. If Tyler Eifert is out this weekend, they're also making a quarterback change, so maybe that means they kind of rely on their big body tight end. Who knows? Once again, tight end is pretty ugly, so there's not many options. So this would be one of the options that's definitely available in your league if you're desperate and need someone to play, because you have the Rams on bye and the Browns on bye, so those guys aren't going to be available to kind of stream. He's really the only way unless you want to go like Trey Burton, but I don't. So he's really somebody that if Tyler Eifert doesn't play, I think he's a very average, below average streaming option this week. Let's go ahead into a couple of defenses. We have Washington playing the New York Giants. Obvious choice here. The Giants aren't that good. Washington actually gets decent pressure on the quarterback. So, yes, they only have 4 points the last time they played, but I think, both of them are, I think, actually coming out. No, because the Giants played the short week, so they played on Monday night. So, yes, Washington coming off the bye should be prepared at home, so I think that they're a decent play as a defense this week. We have the New York Giants on the other side, who I think is also a solid defensive play. They had 14 points last time they played Washington. I mean, let's be honest, Washington's nothing really to anything to write home about, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They're really not that good. Yeah, they beat up Dallas a little bit, but that was Dallas. So New York Giants, I think they're a solid streaming option. And they're only rostered in 11% of leagues, so it should be available. And the last one would be the Minnesota Vikings, who they play Detroit at home. Detroit just doesn't look that good, and now you have Golladay who could possibly be out. I don't know how long. Have to check the injury news on that. But I think that they'd be a decent streaming option. There's not a whole lot this week. You have to see who's available, 20% rostered. So with that being said, thank you for watching. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you and have a great day.